Okay, oh, here we go. Hi, my name is David Ryberg Lessel. I'm working as co-head of CG at a small studio in Copenhagen called BaconX. At the BaconX, you can see some of our creature work on the screen right now. We get to do a lot of exciting creature projects. We're a small team, we are 20 people. We do everything from concept development, animation, compositing, grading, and final mastering. And last summer we got the opportunity to create this CG baby wildhawk for Coop in Coop in Switzerland. And I think we should just start by watching the film, so to give you a little bit of context of what the project entailed.
For over 25 years, Naturaplan has been making sure that people, animals, and nature are doing well, and thus ensures the highest organic quality. Naturaplan, natural, right, good.
So that's one cute pic. As always, when you start out on projects like this, there's always some challenges for us. Some of the challenges was that the main character is full CG. And then the commercial also had a fair high shot count. We had 25 shots in total. And we also wanted the results to be very realistic, but at the same time stable, so it allowed us to iterate fast on the animation. We use a lot of different tools in our pipeline, and we kind of tailor what the tools we use based on the project at hand and also the resources we have available. For this particular project, we used a combination of Maya, Yeti, and V-Ray for asset development, animation, and lighting. And then we used Houdini's FEM and Vellum solvers for simulating the skin and the fur on the pig. We wanted to create a single Houdini setup that was able to handle all shots because we had so many and we don't have an army of effects artists. We took that approach. And then we use shot grid extensively, and we also use it for asset and cache version management between our packages. And then on top of that, then all our Maya and Houdini cache jobs runs on the farm, running Royal Render. So this presentation is going to be in 3 parts. I'm briefly going to go over what assets you need from Maya going into Houdini. And then I'm going to cover the Houdini setup from importing the animation to exporting to Maya again. And then a bit about automation in the end. So first in Maya, we of course need the pig asset, and we also modeled the skeleton of the pig, and then we also published a high-res version of the mesh to Shotgun to transfer the details in the FEM simulation back to the Maya mesh. Then in our Yeti pipeline, we can publish the Yeti guides to Shotgun as well. But we need some more details, and we have this little setup where we can up-res the guides so the Vellum can do its magic in Houdini. You get some nice details in the first simulation that way. This will drive the rest of the Yeti graph, but that's another thing. And then, of course, all the animation shots gets cached out to Shotgun as well. All frame ranges are handled by Shotgun, and we also handle stuff like pre-roll frames in Shotgun, so that also runs in the pipeline. But now to Houdini. This is the entire setup for all the shots. It consists of 4 geometry contexts, one for importing the Maya geometry and processing, getting the geometry ready for simulation. Then we have a context for simulating the skin and a context for simulating the fur. And then finally, a context to exporting the sim back to Maya. And on the top sits a shot manager, which is part of our I/O pipeline. As I mentioned, we use Shotgun a lot. Our main 3D packages are Houdini, Maya, and Blender, and all those packages can publish Alembic caches to Shotgun. And then the rest of our pipeline can read those caches back in and update them as needed. So a bit about the shot manager. This is an SGA that our pipeline understands, and that configures values for frame ranges and pre-roll, and stuff like shot code and sequence code, and what animation version we want to simulate. On a more granular level, we have the 2 additional SGAs that takes care of all the inputs coming from Shotgun and all the outputs going out to Shotgun. Here you can, it's basically just wrappers of existing Houdini I/O tools like the file cache and different ROP nodes. And then in the Python SGA module of these SGAs, we are running queries against Shotgun based on whatever you feed into the interface. The cool thing about this is you can set up your scene, and then you hook up the shot manager with references to everything. And then if you change stuff on the shot manager, then all your inputs and outputs will change accordingly, and you can sit and jump between the animation caches from shot to shot as animation comes out, and you can tweak the setup holistically instead of having to deal with multiple scene files or multiple setup contexts. This is the import setup, and it, yeah, Frankie is coming in. Up here we have the REST model from Maya getting pulled in, the skeleton and the pig, REST poses and the high-res pig. Here we have the animation coming in from Shotgun. This is also coming through the pipeline. Then down here we have some collision publishers that we could publish from the animation scenes. Later down the line, the solvers would disable collisions if no collisions objects were published to Shotgun. Then here we have the guide groom coming in from Yeti through Shotgun and getting processed, attributes set up and stuff like that. And here we have the FEM process tree. But the most important part of this setup is something I call the REST transform. When you set up your character for simulation, you want to do all your constraint and attribute setups in the REST pose, and then you want to run your simulation based on this pose. But the problem is that all the different animation caches come in different places, and they change constantly, and we had 25 shots, so we needed to be able to go from the REST pose, move the REST pose to a position that was more suited, and we didn't really want to, we want a very simple and flexible system, so we didn't have to deal with rigs coming from I/O into Houdini. We just wanted to work with the skeleton geometry. So what we did was we took the REST model of the pig, and then we, by measuring the bounding box values of this REST pose, we created 2 polylines, one going in the Z direction and one going in the Y direction. So we had this coordinate system, and then we just point deformed that to the first pre-roll frame to whatever animation was being brought in. And now we have these 2 coordinate systems. And then we can measure the difference in position and the difference in orientation. And then we can just transform our REST model into a pose that sort of lines up with the first frame of the animation. And then it was just a matter of easing in some blend shaping into the first pre-roll. So now we have now we can start all shots. No matter where the pig is in space, it will line up for the start of the simulation. So about the FEM solver, now we have our geometry in, and we have our REST pose. Time to talk a little bit about the FEM solver. It's a soft body solver that's very stable and produce excellent results. I know there's a new Vellum version out, and I'm eager to look into that, but this is the old top FEM solver, and basically you fill your object with these special Houdini primitives called tetrahedrons, which are basically just triangular shape. You fill your object with these triangulated shapes, and it will try to maintain the rest length between all those pyramids as the model deforms. The way you set up geometry like this is you take your high-res model and then you remesh it to get a nicely dense triangulated surface mesh, and then you use a TED-conform node to fill in the volume of this pig. And then in the bottom, we use the clip node to, since it's a volumetric mesh, it's nice to have this node to be able to inspect the insides, like the density and the size of the tetrahedrons. So that's a good node for troubleshooting. So having generated the TEDs, it's time to set up some constraints. Here you can see I'm animating the clip node, so you can see the inside of Frankie. And we want to constrain the points within the skeleton to the points in the TED mesh to the inside points of the skeleton. And we just use a group node set to a bounding volume, and then we converted the skeleton to a volume. And then you can see that's the areas in green, and we call this point group locked to skeleton. A little bit about setting up attributes. Since this is a volumetric mesh, we can really rely on stuff like texture painting for painting different stiffness and damping values for the simulation. So we just took a group node set to bounding volume and then selected areas of mesh, the model where we wanted some more, wanted to be less stiff and more flexible. But at the bottom, you can see you get these coarse areas, transitions between the point attribute values. So we used the attribute blur node to get a nice smooth transition in those areas. So now we have our FEM object set up with constraints and attributes, and it's time to plug in our animation. We use the point deform node for this. This is an awesome node. I use it all the time. Basically, you feed in, it takes the first port is the object you want to deform, and then you apply your animation to the right port, and the middle port goes the rest pose of the animated geometry. But remember, we did the rest transform before to get the pig to line up with the animation, and that is being applied here. So they line up with the first frame of the animation. And then we just blend shape the rest skeleton pig into the animation, so it starts out smoothly from rest position into the animation. The point deformer are only operating on the locked to skeleton group we created before. You can see it here. And it's only the points inside the skeleton that are getting deformed, and the rest of the pig is just standing there. And the FEM solver will take care of that. So now we go into the DOP network located here, and this is it. A few notes on this. You have your FEM solver and your FEM solid object. Into your FEM solid object, you plug in your tetrahedralized base mesh rest model, and then also the deformed tetrahedralized mesh I showed before. And then the important note here is the FEM target constraint, which you can constrain points to the incoming deforming geometry. It's a very simple node. You just set the type to hard, which tells the constraints that they should match the incoming deformation. And then you select the point group, and then all the areas in green will be driven by the deformation coming from Maya, the skeleton from Maya, and then the rest the solver will take care of. And it gives you a result that looks like this, where you can see it does a really, really good job at solving areas like the clavicles and thighs and hips, and everything just preserves volume and looks very organic and natural. It's an awesome solver. But once you have your solver done, you need to do some. We need to do some post-processing. First, we need to transfer the simulation over to our nicely topologized mesh from Maya. And we also use the point deformer for this. Take in your subdivided mesh, high-res mesh in the rest pose, apply the rest transform, and then we just point deformed it with the cached FEM solve, where we, for the rest pose for this, we just lock the first frame. And the first frame was always also set up to look into the shot manager's frame range and pre-roll field. So when you change the shots, everything works holistically. Yeah, okay. So now we have the high-res Maya mesh following the FemSolve. Now we want to mask out of the areas of the simulation that we don't want. We want to retain the animation in the face and the ears and the tail and the hooves coming from Maya. So we just did a mask for those areas and blurred it a little bit to get a nice transition. And then in a simple attribute wrangle, we just did a linear blend between the simulated geometry and the animated geometry, and we get the areas we want. Last step is to make sure that we can use it back in Maya, and that is to ingest the rest pose. We bring in the rest model, and with a switch node, we switch between the rest model and our result of the masked FemSolve, and then we switched based on the frame range set we enter in our shot manager. But a couple of frames back, we go 2 frames back, so we don't have any issues with the motion blur when the pig jumps 2 meters over 1 frame. And that then get published to Shotgun, so we have access to it in our pipeline. Very briefly on the Vellum solver, it's amazing for fur dynamics. We use it on all our creature shots. This was the first project where we used the Fem solver, but we've been using Vellum since it came out. Very briefly, for processing the guides, we downread them quite a bit coming out of Yeti because we wanted a very stiff fur, and the Vellum solver requires a lot of iterations if you want to simulate stiff fur on a detailed groom like this. Also, some notes on collisions. This is the resampled guide. We also guide strand. We also added some additional topology near the root of the guide so that it could have some more flexibility when deforming in tight areas. And the Vellum solver picks up on these 2 special attributes called disable external and disable self. We set those to 1 on the root points here, and the Vellum solver will simply ignore self collisions and external collisions if that attribute is above 1. So that's very nice. Again, getting the Vellum solver set up, same basis as the Fem solver. Bring in the rest guides on the left. This time we are bringing in the masked FemSolve from the previous step. And then for the rest guides, we make sure to apply the same rest transform as we did to the FemSolve, and then we lock the start frame of the FemSolve and then into a point deformer, and the guide follows the mesh. Here is the optional collision step. We also collided the fur with the pig itself, so especially for areas around the thighs and hips, it gave some nice results. And then there's an optional environment collision switch based on whether or not stuff is coming in from Shotgun. And yeah, it was a very basic Vellum setup. We just pinned the root points to the animation, and that was it. Then finally, we also ingest the same rest pose and publish that to Shotgun again, like we did with the Fem solver. So now we have the guides standing at rest and the model standing at rest at in this case, frame 999, and it's ready to be blend shaped on top of our Yeti groomed mesh and also plugged into Yeti. And that's what the first simulation looks like on top of the Fem solver. Gives a lot of nice additional secondary dynamics, as well as solving the neck and shoulder areas very nice. So that's it for the Houdini part. I'm just going to briefly talk about our in-house tool called Cashfire, which is a tool we've been developing for all our creature projects. You basically gives it a project and an asset list, and then an element, which is a naming convention in our work file pipeline, and then you just press update, and it asks Shotgun for all the shots that has this asset assigned to it, and then also list all the animation files, lighting files, and groom files that are associated with that shot, also with what version they're on and how old they are. Versions that are less than a day old will be colored green, so it's easy to solo out all the shots you want to process. And then in the bottom, we can like daisy chain together a queue for the farm. So here we can update our rigs and increment the animation scenes and also cache out new animation to Shotgun. And that can again, we have the Houdini jobs I've just been showing. We can enable those as well as a job for caching out the Yeti and FirstSim. And then finally, we can update and submit the lighting scenes based on the results from the previous step, and also update and submit slab comps. And that goes a little bit like this. So at the end of the day, animators are done, and the look dev and groom artists have done their magic, and I've tweaked the setup for Houdini, and everything just goes to the farm and gets processed overnight. And next morning when we come in, there's new versions for all shots on Shotgun for everybody in the team to review the final result of, or like the current iteration of the final result. And the creative director can immediately give feedback to the animators based on with groom and muscle simulation. It's not a muscle simulation, but film simulation on top of that. Yeah, and this is what it looks like. All the steps, also with the final Yeti groom, gives a really, really nice result. So that was a brief walkthrough how to take your animation from Maya and process it in Houdini, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was terrific.
Thanks.
Any questions? While you think about your questions, how long have you been using Houdini?
7 years.
And how did you initially discover it?
I've been doing CG for 20 years,
yeah.
And 7 years ago I actually saw a tutorial from Simon that had a presentation this morning where I did a setup for some bubbles, VDB,
yeah.
Voodoo, and I just looked at Maya and thought, okay, now's the time. Yeah.
I think we had a question over here. Yeah.
How much time does it take you from starting a project, like, okay, we want to do this pick, to finishing it? Because for me, it's always very hard to guess something like that, the time that's spent in it.
It depends a lot from project to project. For this particular project, I think we had 6 weeks from locked edit to final delivery, but we started as it built up a little bit, rig build and model build a couple of weeks earlier than that to get a head start for animation because there was a lot of shots.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So my question would be more on the Yeti side, Yeti and Maya, because in the end, what's your output from Houdini to be used in Maya? Is it just an Alembic with NURBS? And
yeah.
Okay, so because Yeti has its own like cache format in Maya, do you have also an automated tool to do the cache in Maya afterwards? So you export from Houdini to Maya, you load it into Yeti, and then you export the new cache file from Yeti?
Yeah. Basically, we have a scene builder for the groom step in Maya where we based whether or not we could also disable the Houdini step if we needed faster turnarounds. But we have a scene builder for the groom scene that asks Shotgun, give me the latest groom asset and give me the based on what animation you are processing, give me the latest Houdini cache with that version of both the pick with the FemSolve and the guide curves, and then the blend, like the mesh coming out of Houdini would be blend shapes on top of the Yeti mesh that was driving. That was why it was important to get the rest post ingested at the published stuff from Houdini. So you have the Yeti mesh of the pig and the Houdini mesh of the pig lining up, so you can just blend shape them back in Maya, and your Yeti node would just work, and then we would cache out the Yeti groom on the farm with some Python. Yes. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
What was the average simulation time for both the skin and the fur?
I think the worst part was actually Yeti, but it was not too bad. I think the FEM solver, I mean, it's fairly short shots, so it's I think the shots were around 50 frames each, or 60 if pushing it, and then 25 frames of pre-roll. I think it was around 30-45 minutes for a simulation, but we offloaded it to the farm. The main time was spent it would be nice to cut down on the speed. That's why I want to look into the Vellum version of it, because like when you start tweaking your values for the stiffness and stuff, it's fairly heavy. We also had, because the pig is running so fast, in order to not lose the mesh behind, we had to up the substeps for the FEM solver to 5, which is fairly high and heavy. And the Vellum sim was, yeah, that's 10 minutes tops. I don't know, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
With Houdini Hedgen also being available while doing also CFX on the groom, what did you or why did you use Yeti instead of Houdini in this situation?
It's a mix of a lot of things. Main reason is that we have a lot of Maya artists at hand. That's the one reason, that knows Yeti very well. And the other main reason is because of rendering. But now Karma is coming out, so I'm keeping an eye out for that. But Yeti is really efficient at generating all the fur at render time, and we don't really have that option in Houdini with V-Ray, which is our preferred renderer. Obviously, we have Mantra, but it's a bit old. But hopefully, Karma will have. I haven't looked into it, but I hope Karma will have an option for generating fur at render time. Yeah. So those are the two main reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carmen. It will. Kai says it will. Speaking of Kai, I'm going to throw Kai under the bus here a little bit. If you need to know anything on SideFX Houdini grooming, Kai is on the SideFX R&D team. He's an experienced TD, specifically working on grooming tools in Houdini. And so if you have any questions on grooming, Kai, right here, is your guy. And sitting right next to him is Esther Trilch, who's working on KineFX rigging. So if you have any questions on rigging, she is your lady. And they speak German, unlike me. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Well, thank you very much, David.
Yeah, welcome.